One of the key developments in the plot in Philip K. Dick's novel Ubik is an attack, really an ambush, that is orchestrated fairly early on in the work, and it's going to have massive effects as a lot of people wind up being killed and having to go into cold pack without actually knowing that until later on in the novel. And there's some lead up to it that is going to be importantly developed, and then we also find out some confirmation towards the end of the novel about what actually happened. And I think we can talk about three main important factors that are coming together. So one of these is this character, Pat Conley, who is a new kind of talent. And as it happens, her parents both work for this rival organization. So we have prudence organizations who employ anti-psi talents, that's anti-psionic talents, although they do also employ a few people who have psionic talents. For example, the talent scout, who is a telepath, right? Who we meet early on in the story. And what they're there to do is to counteract the organizations like that of Ray Hollis, who employ telepaths, precogs, and a variety of other psionic talents. So there's this kind of war going on, but usually not one that involves killing each other, although we do find out at certain points they will, in fact, at least the Ray Hollis organization will kill some of what are called the inertials of the various prudence organizations. Runciter's is the most highly recommended, and so they've been doing this jockeying back and forth. And so it's important that Pat Conley's parents don't find out about her working for not just the competition, but the enemy, so to speak. And Joe is not the talent scout, he is the tester. He doesn't actually have any sort of psionic talent or anti-talent himself, but he is going to assess her. So he's brought her by the scout, and he is going to write something down very, very interesting. He actually files 2 reports about her. So the first one says, anti-psi field generated, inadequate, below standard throughout, no value against precog ratings now in existence. And then the code mark, which he employed, a circle with a stroke dividing it, do not hire, the symbol meant. And only he and Glen Runciter knew that. Not even their scouts knew the meaning of the symbol. So G.G. Ashwood could not have told her. But he's going to file another one. And it's going to be a bit different. He wrote her name, then spurious, extraordinarily high test results, and then at last his conclusions. His new conclusions: has unbelievable power, anti-psi field, unique in scope, can probably negate any assembly of precogs imaginable. After that, he scratched a symbol, this time 2 crosses, both underlined. Pat, standing behind him, watched him. Right, he felt her breath on his neck. What do the 2 underlined crosses mean, she said. Hire her, Joe said, at whatever cost required. But we're going to find out something different. The underlined crosses did not symbolize what he told her. They meant, watch this person. She is a hazard to the firm. She is dangerous. Now, this is going to come up again in a little bit of discussion that's going to happen in chapter 5, where Runciter is talking with G.G. Ashwood, the talent scout, and he says, what's up with this talent? Joe Chip can't seem to tell me what she does. And they talk about her going back in time and all of that. And then he says, I'm going to tell Joe to his face he's crazy to include this Pat Conley girl if she's so dangerous? Include her on what? Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. Wouldn't you say, Gigi? And Ashwood says, well, he's got a thing going with her. What sort of thing? A sexual understanding. And then Runciter says, Joe has no sexual understanding. Nina Fried read his mind the other day, and he's too poor even to. So the idea is that he can't possibly have anything going with anybody. But she is actually his mistress. And we'll find out a little bit later, she's his wife. Because in chapter 5, Joe Chip realized she's been doing something. I can't put my finger on it, but things are different. And she says, nothing is different. And Joe says, everything is different. You went back in time and put us on a different track. I can't prove it, and I can't specify the nature of the changes. And it turns out that she's now his wife, and they didn't get the contract that we'll talk about in just a moment. So they look up her file, and the old file is still there under her name, Patricia Conley. So there's an initial scouting report by Ashwood and then test findings by Chip. Runciter says, Joe, you better come look at this. Come here. He jabbed a finger at the page. Joe, coming over beside him, saw the twin underlined crosses. He and Runciter glanced at each other, then at Pat. I know what it reads. Unbelievable power, anti-psi field, unique in scope, can probably... And then Runciter says, well, we did get the Mick contract. I had a group of 11 inertials in here, and then I suggested to her that she show the group what she can do. So her demonstration of what she can do changed the past and the present. They are going to get the contract back, but we also do need to talk about something else that happens, and this is... in chapter 5 as well. There are some interesting dreams that get brought up here and in chapter 6 as well. So we begin with Tippy Johnson, who is an anti-telepath, who is having an artificially induced dream state centered around a mythical Hollis functionary endowed with enormous psionic powers. And every other inertial had either given up or been melted down into lard. The task of nullifying this field generated by this supernatural entity had devolved to her. The opponent says, I can't be myself while you're around, right? And Tippy is going to say, well, that's why you feel threatened by me. And then it turns into two different telepaths. Well, actually, a telepath and a precog, right? So there's this interesting dream of a threat. And Tippy says, what does this actually mean? And both Matt and Bill said in unison, we're going to get you. As it turns out, she's not the only one having this dream. We find out in chapter 6, others have had this dream as well. So there's something going on in the background. Now, chapter 4, we get back to business, to nuts and bolts. We have this character, Miss Wirt, come in, and she has a proposal that she is bringing to the table to the Runciter organization. So she says, we're having a little trouble with telepaths. We think so, but we're not sure. We maintain a telepath of our own, one we know about who's supposed to circulate among our employees. If he comes across any psis, telepaths, or precogs, any kind, he's supposed to report to my principal. Last week he made such a report. We have an evaluation done by a private firm on the capacities of various prudence agencies. Yours is rated foremost. And so Runciter says, well, how many telepaths did your man pick up? More than one? 2 at least. Possibly more? Possibly. And so Runciter says, okay, here's how we operate. We come in, we do some testing. That way we're not going in blind. We know how much to bring and what kind of anti-psi talents to bring. And she says, well, my employer wants you to move in your inertials right away without the time-consuming and an expensive formality of making tests. And he says, well, that's not really how we work. Here's why. And she says, my employer is impatient. And he says, well, I'll talk to him. Give me his number. And she says, no, you'll deal with me. Now, meanwhile, they're having some research done on her. She tells him she works for a subsidiary firm, which her employer financially controls. She knows who her immediate employer is, Mr. Shepard Howard, but I've never been told who Mr. Howard represents. And he finds out, there's a micro speaker in his left ear, Miss Wirt represents Stanton Mick. She is his confidential assistant. There is no one named Shepard Howard. The project under discussion exists primarily on Luna. It has to do with Tech Prize, mixed research facilities, the controlling stock of which Miss Wirt keeps in her name. She does not know any technical details. No scientific evaluations or memos or progress reports are ever made available to her by Mr. Mick, and she resents this enormously. From Mick's staff, however, she has picked up a general idea of the nature of the project. And so it's about a new low-cost interstellar drive system which could be leased to every moderately affluent political or ethnological group. So it would make mass colonization possible. So this is a pretty important project. They're going to be paid very well. And so what does Runciter do? He puts together this team of inertials. Because Miss Wirt says, well, we want 11. Right? So they get some anti-telepaths, some anti-precogs, a few others along the way just in case they run into something else. And then Joe Chip the tester, even though Mick doesn't want things tested, Pat Conley, this kind of, we don't really know what she's up to, and Runciter himself is going to go with them on his ship. So we have a big team going up there. And what ends up happening? Well, they're given a contract to counteract Hollis's psi talents. That's the explanation that is being given to them. They go up there and they're treated pretty well. They have some nice accommodations. They get off of the ship. They meet Miss Wirt, who tells them all the perks that they're going to enjoy. And then Stanton Mick shows up. And meanwhile, Joe is testing the psi field before Mick gets there. That's going to be important. So Mick shows up. He says, hello, all you top anti-psis. The exterminators are here. By that I mean yourselves, right? The plague in the form of various psionic riffraff descended upon the harmless, friendly, peaceful world of Stanton Mick. What a day that was for us in Mickville, as we call our attractive and appetizing lunar settlement here. You have, of course, already started work, as I knew you would. That's because you're tops in the field, as everyone realizes when Runciter Associates is mentioned. I'm already delighted at your activity with the one small exception that I perceive your tester here dingling with his equipment. Tester, would you look this way when I'm speaking to you? Joe shut off his polygraphs and gauges, killed the power supply. Do I have your attention now? Stanton Mick asked him. Yes, Joe said. Leave your equipment on, Runciter ordered him. You're not an employee of Mr. Mick. You're my employee. It doesn't matter, Joe said to him. I've already gotten a reading on the psi field being generated in this vicinity. He'd done his job. Stanton Mick had been too slow in arriving. How great is the field? Runciter asked him. Joe said, there is no field. That's a problem, because that means there aren't any psi talents to nullify. It's just them there. And now Runciter realizes that something is up. So he says, where did you get the idea psis had infiltrated your operations here on Luna? Why didn't you want us to run our normal test? Did you know we would get this result? Joe Chip says, yeah, he must have known. Rapid, agit activity crossed Runciter's face. He started to speak to Stanton Mick, then changed his mind and said to Joe in a low voice, let's get back to Earth. Get our inertials out of here right now, he says to the others. Collect your possessions. We're flying back to New York. I want all of you in the ship within the next 15 minutes. Any of you who aren't will be left behind. Joe, get all that junk of yours together in one heap. I'll help you lug it to the ship. That shows you the urgency here. Stanton Mick begins floating up to the top of the room, his arms protruding distendedly and rigidly, saying, "Mr. Runciter, don't let your thalamus override your cerebral cortex. This matter calls for discretion, not haste. Calm your people down and let's huddle together in an effort to mutually understand." Runciter says, "Oh, I've heard of this. This is a self-destruct humanoid bomb. Help me get everyone out of here." And then the bomb goes off. And what we think is happening at this point in the story is that Runciter has been injured fatally. He's going to be put in cold pack. What actually turns out to be the case is Runciter is the sole survivor. Everybody else has been killed, and they're placed into cold pack. Now, we find out what's actually taking place, at least as much as we can, about this plot much later in chapter 13. Joe is himself dying. He's being devoured in cold pack by this fatigue, this bone-chilling cold that is taking him. And he thinks that Pat Conley is responsible for it. He tells Pat Conley that he was in love with Wendy Wright, who was consumed first. And she says, "Oh, I know. Gigi Ashwood told me. He read your mind. Gigi and I got to be very good friends. We spent a lot of time together. You might say we had an affair." "Yes, you could say that." And Joe says, "Our theory was in the right. That you and Gigi worked it out with Ray Hollis to infiltrate." "Quite right," Pat agreed. "Our best inertials and Runciter wipe us all out." Right? And so she's confirming that. And then in the next chapter, Runciter himself is going to talk about this with Joe. And Joe says, "When did you figure out what was taking place? Did you always know from the start?" And Runciter says, "The start? What's that mean? It started months or maybe even years ago. God knows how long Hollis and Mick and Pat Conley and Estol Melopone and Gigi Ashwood have been hatching it up, working it over and reworking it like dough. Here's what happened." Now we learn, at least through Runciter's eyes. "We got lured to Luna, right? There's the contract. We let Pat Conley come with us, a woman we didn't know, a talent we didn't understand, which possibly even Hollis doesn't understand, an ability anyhow connected with time reversion, not strictly speaking the ability to travel through time." And then all of this came together. So this is the precipitating plot. Runciter thinks that it's been going on months, years in advance. He could be right, or he could be wrong about that, but certainly there is this trickery and treachery going on, and it actually does, in fact, get Pat Conley, who's in on the plot, killed and in cold pack herself. So very important plot development that is going to drive a significant part of the story in this novel, Ubik.